Hello and welcome again to FAIRtax Power Radio. I'm Bob Paxton.
And I'm Ron Malero.
And we are
the
FAIRtax Guys. And we have got a treat and a half for you today, do we not?
Yep. We've arranged an interview with Steve Hayes, who's the president of the Americans For Fair Taxation. That is our mothership, you might say, the national organization.
The one man on the face of the earth that knows more about the fair tax than anybody else you can name, I do believe.
No, I think that's absolutely true. He's been involved with the idea of a consumption tax since before any of us really realized, that it was far superior to an income tax. He's been at it a long time, since before there was an Americans for Fair Taxation, as you'll hear about.
All right. Well, let's get right to it and get to talk to Steve Hayes, president of Americans for Fair Taxation. And FAIRtax Power Radio is pleased to be talking to what I'm pretty sure is the man who knows more about the fair tax than any other human being alive, the president of Americans for Fair Taxation, Steve Hayes. Thank you for having us.
Bob and Ron, thank you for doing this.
Yeah,
I really
appreciate you inviting us into your home for this.
Well, I'm just delighted that you drove down, and I'm delighted to do it.
All right. Quick question. For people who are just getting into the fair tax and don't know who Steve Hayes is, briefly kind of comment on your lifelong quest to get rid of the income tax and detail some of your actual involvement with AFFT.
Sure. I was a person, and I'm introduced now as a recovering tax attorney because I used to do tax work. And I got so disgusted with the tax law itself and decided to try to help do something about it. Went to D.C., met with people, saw the attempt in '86 to try to fix the code, which really only allowed it to be unfixed immediately because it kept the income tax system in place. And in 1990, I was doing some research, and I sort of got with some other people, and we said, wouldn't it be great to have the income tax go away and have a retail sales tax? So we would be like we were back in Constitution days. Mm-hmm. And wouldn't that be wonderful? You get rid of the IRS, you get rid of income tax, you get rid of all of these forms, and people get to see exactly what tax they're paying. They
Right.
don't have any illusions about the cost of government because they see it. So we started out, and it took off. I mean, I was on radio shows all around the country by phone and sometimes in person 3-4 times a day. It was just like an incredibly receptive talk show market, and we suddenly had people from all over the country forming chapters. We weren't organizationally ready for it, but we kind of made it work. And we took off, and then during that first 2 years of this operation, it was called Citizens for an Alternative Tax System, I met Jack Trotter and Leo Limbeck and Bob McNair in Houston. They were the three. I used to joke with them that you had to be a billionaire to be on their board because they were very, very wealthy people. But they had something that is not necessarily unique, but they actually cared about how the economic system worked, and they actually were looking at doing something about it, even though in their cases it was going to cause them to pay more tax than they'd been paying. They were very, very adept at doing, like Buffett said, where they paid less tax than their secretary or their chief administrator. Mm-hmm. And so they were unique, they were very sincere, and they decided to start up a think tank, basically, to really investigate it, because the Citizens for an Alternative Tax proposal just replaced the income tax, the corporate tax, and the estate tax. And Leo's research, and they spent millions of dollars on research. I mean, these guys, Leo was an engineer, he built huge projects, and he believed everything had to be thoroughly studied before you did it. And Leo decided that the only way to really accomplish what we wanted to do was if you also got rid of the funding for Social Security through the payroll tax. And so that's how the fair tax developed. And I was sort of, as you say, along for the ride. And I did media for Leo. And in 2000, the groups sort of merged together.
Mm-hmm.
And since 2000, I've been working with Leo, and unfortunately, most of the original people, except for Bob McNair, that I had become quite close to in Houston, have passed on. And so we've got a situation where in 2014, the operation of AFFT, which had been run by a select group of, again, very wealthy Houstonians, was passed over to a group of us who were elected by fair tax members in each state.
So you basically went from a private to a public
Public.
thing. And that's one of the things I wanted to ask you about is what have been some of the successes for making that transition, and what kind of challenges has that brought on?
Well, it's been really good in the sense that people who used to call me and say, Steve, you need to talk to Leo and tell him he needs to do this or this or this.
Mm-hmm.
They no longer have to worry about that because they can just call their delegate or their board member, and if it makes any sense, we're going to try it.
Mm-hmm.
So it's an advantage that way. I think people feel like they're much more involved in the process, invested in the process.
So you'd say it's more responsive to ideas
Absolutely.
that people would bring
Yeah,
to you?
yeah, and we work with people all the time trying to help them maybe even do more than they initially thought, and we've had some real successes. The negative side of that, concomitant, going along with it, is that when you no longer have a board of billionaires who have put up 95% of the funding in the tens of millions of dollars, by the way, not just pocket change, you replace it with very dedicated fair tax volunteers who themselves are not
multi-billionaires
or whatever. You have a different challenge from a funding point of view.
How is that working out? Are we're still meeting our bills?
We're still paying the bills. We're now close to a point where we are making consistently more than our monthly budget, but we've had to make a lot of cuts. We don't have any employees.
Mm-hmm. Everybody's a volunteer.
Everybody's a volunteer. Like when I go to D.C., I pay my own expenses, and it's like a thing that hopefully that'll change, but at this point that's where it is. And when we get more money in, we find that we need to do something with the database. We need to do something, like I'm talking to a professor today about doing a study on evasion. He's done a lot of work on evasion and how it's growing now. And so an updated study to have available at the end of the year so that when the new president, whether it's Hillary or Trump, we will have some really good numbers to show them as to why the present system is just not working.
Mm-hmm. Amen. Well, I have heard that there are some deep pockets kind of on the sidelines watching to see how this is going to work, and if the grassroots organization can prove itself to be financially viable, then these guys will jump in and help fund special projects. Is that accurate?
Incredibly correct. I've been told by, I won't say who it is, but it's a guy. He calls me from his private plane, his new huge jet that he flies around. It's not the Trump size, but it's
not
big.
a 757, but it's
big.
Still a nice aircraft.
And he's a billionaire, and he's very interested in the consumption tax, fair tax, but he's also is in a situation where he wants to put his money in if it looks like it's going to get a really good chance of being received, and that probably means Trump, to be honest with you. I think that since we've talked, there have been a lot of changes, and one of the main changes that's come up is that the bill, and I wrote about it in last week's Fair Tax Friday, Senator Ben Cardin, when I met with him, said, I'm going to be delighted to work with you, Steve, on getting a consumption tax done. And I said, well, thank you, Senator. That's very gracious. I'm looking forward to working with you. And then we started going into what his definition of consumption tax was. And it is a sales tax on income, on people. Everybody pays it. And an income tax on income over $100,000 for a married couple. and a corporate tax, which he has stated is going to become a value-added tax. So it's Europe.
That's scary.
Yeah, and that's the plan, and it's interesting, Bob and Ron, because he obviously had looked at some of our numbers and some of the statements we've been making, because he said to me, he said, Steve, most of the evasion is happening with people under 100,000. Isn't that probably right? And I said, yeah, a good chunk of it. I said, I don't have the exact breakdown, but I'd say a lot of it is. And he said, okay, so we're going to substantially cut into the evasion problem by having that. And he said
the tax gap is just unimaginably huge.
Well, it's over $600 billion now.
Now, that is taxes that are owed, but the current system is not collecting them.
Yes. Yeah, taxes that are estimated to be owed, and it's estimated because it's a little bit of wiggle room, but it's between 600 and maybe even, like some people think 700 billion.
Wow.
But the situation that you have, it's like, I think I may have told the story, but I think it's important. When I talked to Speaker Ryan before he became Speaker, when he was chairman of the Ways and Means Committee, it was an engaging talk. He's a very pleasant man to talk with. He actually comes across on TV the way he actually is in person. It's unusual. But he said to me, he said, I'm really committed to a particular reforming the present code and changing it, making it simpler, making it cheaper, lower rates. And I told him that frankly was probably, in my own opinion, too little too late, because most people are evading their income tax, and they would appreciate the fact that on the part of the income they pay tax on, you're going to lower the rate. But remember, they're also evading Social Security and state income taxes. So in California, for example, you may have somebody and you may say, okay, your top rate's going to be 25% and not 40%. But remember, he's going to add 15% self-employment tax and another 7% California tax. So he's over 40%. So he's already made the decision that it's okay to hide part of his income and pay zero tax. So if he's got, say, $20,000 of income that's not being reported, he's either going to pay under your program $8,000, or he's going to continue to pay zero. How likely is it that he's going to decide, I'd rather pay the $8,000? And Ryan looked at me like he, swallowed a lemon or something, and
oops, got him.
and because he really had no answer to that. And I said, and he says, well, all right, well, what would be your suggestion as to how to fix that? And I said, the only way I believe you're going to fix it is you're going to have to prosecute multiple times more than the 2,000 people a year that are prosecuted for federal violation. You're going to have to become much more aggressive in tax audits. You're going to have to multiply the number of auditing IRS agents. You're going to have to make their audits much more intrusive. You're going to have to demand much more evidence from taxpayers. And frankly, you're going to have to become so intrusive that you're going to discover some of these, because these people who are doing this are not stupid. They're set it up in such a way that's very hard to find. And I said, I don't know that any member of Congress wants to be the person who takes credit for doing that. And again, he looked at me like he wasn't pleased with that answer.
I can imagine.
But that's pretty much where we are, I think, is that you've got an interesting thing developing. Mike Pence, who's the selected vice presidential candidate for Trump, was a fair tax supporter when he was in the House, and spoke up and is on tape talking about all the benefits and why it's a benefit from a trade point of view, and how it would help Indiana for their exports, and how it would help keep jobs in the United States. He actually understands the fair tax. That's what my point is. It's not just that he signed his name. And then you've got one of his closest advisors is Mike Huckabee. Well, we all know where Mike is on this.
Yes.
Mike is one of the few people that I really believe understands most of the nuances of the fair tax and can explain it.
Mm-hmm.
And then his daughter is one of Trump's spokespeople, media spokespeople. And recently, Audrey Pruitt, who is a gentleman, an African-American who's on our board.
Yeah, we've spoken to him. He's a nice guy.
He's a great guy, isn't he? And Audrey is now an official surrogate of Trump.
I did not know that.
So he is helping Trump with the minorities, but also with the more of the millennials, the younger people, because Audrey's a younger guy.
Yeah.
And he is effectively doing it, but he just wrote a book, which comes out in about 8 days. And his book is a book in defense of Trump.
Okay.
And it's because he believes that Trump is there. And in the back of the book, and one of the new ideas he believes Trump would be able to sponsor and would likely look at sponsoring is the fair tax.
Good. Okay. We need to move along here a little bit. I know that you've been on the ground in Washington, D.C. for a long time. First, thank you for your service.
Thank you.
And I wanted to ask you really, what progress has been made since we talked to you about a year ago? What progress has been made in recent months and years, mostly, say, to bring Democrats on board? Republicans seem to, a lot of them seem to like this, but a lot of Democrats don't like it just because they think it's a Republican idea.
A lot of that we've found has gone away.
Good.
Not so much for the fair tax, but just that idea that it's regressive because of Ben Cardin's plan. In other words, he puts out the 10% sales tax.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a situation that they now, when we go into some of the Democrat offices, whereas before
they just don't want to talk to
you.
Don't
want to talk to you. They ask questions like, "What's the difference? How would it? What would be the impact? What is the?" And they ask real questions though about border adjustability and things which weren't really on the table before. So I'm very encouraged by that.
Okay.
And I think we all should be. That we're getting to a point with the Democrats where it's no longer a dirty word to talk about sales tax, but it's simply, well, maybe the rate's too high or the prebate's not high enough or whatever. Mm-hmm. But see, that's a whole different game.
At least they're on board with the fundamental idea of replacing the income tax with a consumption tax of some sort right now.
More and more of them.
Excellent. Okay, one other thing I wanted to get along with you before we run out of time here is taxes are something that, obviously affect everybody directly in terms of how much money Uncle Sam removes from your wallet by force, indirectly by how tax policy affects the economy. What's in it for the average Joe taxpayer to replace the income tax with the fair tax? I know that's a broad question, but have at it.
Well, it kind of depends on each time that where the taxpayer is. Let's start with that.
Okay.
Some people are going to spend more money, like myself. I'm at a point in age and all where I am spending a lot less money than my daughter and her husband. Okay. However, what people don't realize is that for people like my daughter and her husband, it may not be any additional tax at all, even though they're spending a lot more, because they've had all of the taxes under the present system that were hidden from them. Mm-hmm. For example, they had to make the income, pay Social Security, pay the tax to net whatever they spent.
Mm-hmm.
In this case, you get all of your income.
Yeah, that's the big part. No more withholding.
That's right. You get all of your income, at least for federal initially.
Yes.
All of your income, and then you spend the money as you see fit. The other thing, and this is very, very true, is that today, when you get your net income, let's say it cost you $1.30 or $1, in their case, I did some looking, $1.35 for them to net $1.
Mm-hmm.
And they go out and they buy used things. What still costs them the $1? What happens under the fair tax? No tax on used items. So these people are going to find, in my example, that a lot of money is not going to be spent in taxes because they're buying used goods, and the fair tax does not tax used goods.
Right.
So most people are going to find themselves in the same or better position, but primarily they're going to find themselves, particularly for younger people working, with a much greater economic opportunity, because the best thing that you can have is a job if you're working at this. And nothing, and I mean nothing, will create jobs more than a consumption tax that doesn't punish people who invest and people who work hard. You know, think about it. You get rewarded for working harder. Under the present system, I mean, I've talked to labor unions and all this, and they say, oh, yeah, well, they offered me overtime, but when you figured all the taxes out, I was making less than regular time. I decided I'd rather spend my time fishing. I mean, I've had these over and over conversations. This is a situation where you're going to be able to get what you earn, what you
I love the idea of bringing home your full gross amount, plus getting the prebate on top of that, plus not having to ever fill out an income tax return, even if it's as small as a postcard.
It's absolute freedom. It's absolute ability to have, in most cases, no more tax than they're paying today, probably less. But again, depends on how they're spending it.
I think if you spread the tax base out a little bit, each individual taxpayer's share goes down.
Well, but here's the other part. The reason that's true is that under the fair tax, because it's a retail sales tax, 90+% of retail sales are collected by less than 10% of the merchants.
Yeah, that's your Walmart, Target, your big box stores like that.
So evasion goes down. I talked to Charles Runner in California, and they collected $50 billion of sales tax, and they did a study to find out what they thought their evasion was.
Who's that?
Charles Runner is the Department of Equalization, which collects the sales tax.
Okay.
And he said it was, and I made him repeat it, it was 5%, of which 2.5% was the use tax, meaning people bought things from out of state and they didn't pay the sales tax and they brought it in, which would no longer be appropriate with a fair tax. So the effective evasion in California was 2.5%. Okay?
Wow.
And that's not because people just want to be honest as much as it is that you've got fewer collection points.
You've got a system that discourages the evasion.
Yeah. And you try going to Walmart, Bob, and saying, I don't want to pay sales tax today. All right?
I actually tried that one time when I was about 6 years old. They said the little soda pop I was buying, that's that in your tax. Well, I don't want to pay the tax. And they said, okay, so the clerk took the bottle out of my hand and took it back. Okay, I'll pay the tax. I'll pay the tax.
Yeah. So basically, everybody benefits. We have more jobs. We have jobs coming back to America as opposed to going away from America. You get Apple bringing their money back here and using it to create jobs here.
All right.
You get people working here. And that is a huge benefit. But also, for young people, one of their biggest worries is that they're going to have to take care of old people like me. All right? And they won't have Social Security. Well, presently, they're right. Under the present income payroll tax system, evasion is growing so great, plus the number of workers per retiree is going down. The Social Security is going to go bankrupt. Medicare is going to go bankrupt. And you have different beliefs. It's 2030, it's 2025, but it's not long. Fair tax actually stabilizes that because it provides funding that keeps it economically viable. So part of the relief to younger people is they're not going to have to take care of us old folks.
All right.
And because the Social Security is going to continue to pay. So my daughter keeps reminding me of that. But but basically, there's nothing but I can see but benefits. And the main thing is that people can be responsible again because they know what their government's costing them.
All right. Well, as I have said many times here on Fairtax Power Radio, time flies when you're having fun. Our 20 minutes here is just about up, but I thank you so much for talking to us and sharing your expertise, and hopefully we can talk to you again in the future.
Look forward to it.
Steve Hayes, President of Americans for Fair Taxation. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Oh, and there you have it. A lot of good information in a fairly short period of time from AFFT President Steve Hayes, and I was especially heartened to hear that there is some movement on the Democratic side of the aisle towards at least considering maybe not the fair tax per se, but they are now open to a consumption tax. And when you start talking about what's the best way to do it, the fair tax wins that argument hands down.
Absolutely. It's got so much research behind it. But yeah, that is very good news because unfortunately, and we've talked about this before, Bob and I, the polarization in Washington just kind of clams people up. If it's a bill that was proposed by the Republicans, the Democrats ignored it, and vice versa. If there was a bill that was proposed by the Democrats, the Republicans would ignore it. So that's changing, and in large part to Steve's efforts. Steve and Peggy Green Ernst, who is another board member of AFFT, who go up there once a month. Steve goes up totally at his own expense. And they know the people up there. Steve's been doing this so long; he knows so many people, as you could tell from the interview, and also other conversations that we've had from him. So, yeah, it's really good that things are changing, and people are looking at other alternatives. Because why? Because this tax code is imploding under its own weight.
Yeah, it does. And I tell you what, it really doesn't matter what your political affiliation is. I don't know anybody that doesn't want more money in their pocket or want to have better jobs in this country. And that's what the fair tax does.
Yeah. And what they're looking at up there is that the income tax is not working. The evasion rate is so high. And that's putting extra pressure on the people that get W-2s, the working people. Okay. And they're really coming to grips with this.
All right. Well, we're really short on time today because we wanted to give Steve as much time as we could talk to him on. And we again encourage everyone to become members of Americans for Fair Taxation. The 1040 clubs are a really good idea if you can do that. We'd appreciate that. That's where you pledge $10.40 a month towards AFFT to get rid of the income tax.
Yep.
Get rid of the Form 1040.
That kind of sustaining membership there is very important so that they can show that the AFT can show that they are financially viable.
And Steve talked about that. So,
Yep. And then
what else do you want to hit on real quick, especially the webinar so your wife doesn't shoot you?
Yeah, that's right. The webinar, fourth Thursday of every month, you have to register in advance by going to fairtax.org/webinar. It is interactive. You can post questions, and they will try to answer the questions. As of this recording, the next webinar is going to be hosted by my wife and I. They've asked us to run the webinar for them. That's going to be interesting because we've never done that before.
Well, that's going to be fun.
Oh, yeah. So I'm sure Bob will be in there asking some great questions.
Oh, yes. And as always, we do encourage people to get in contact with us. The FAIRtax Guys at gmail.com is our email address. Or you can go to our Facebook page, post a question, post a comment. We'd love to hear from you.
Yep. And quick reminder, we just found out we got 2 more co-sponsors, both from Michigan. So we're up to a total of 83, which is almost the highest we've been. That's pretty good news.
Now, how much does the next most popular tax reform proposal have in the way of co-sponsors? Just for curiosity.
As we mentioned in one of our previous episodes, the flat tax, it's got 0 co-sponsors.
There must be a reason for that. But still, 83 is a nice number, but compared to the overall 435, actually 535, you include the Senate as well, the people that we've got to convince to do this thing, we've still got a lot of work to do, and we still need your help.
We sure do. We really have our work cut out for us. But this is a very worthy cause. This is really going to help our country, our kids, and our grandkids. We really all need to get behind this.
All right, and that's going to wrap it up for this edition of Fair Tax Power Radio. Thank you so much for listening. We're on Spreaker, iTunes, SoundCloud, and are we on iHeart yet? We're still working on that?
No, I haven't heard back from iHeart. I don't know what's going on over there.
Okay. Well, anyway, this is Bob Paxton and Ron Malero, the FAIRtax Guys, reminding you the fair tax is America's big solution, and once you understand it,
you'll demand it.
Fair tax is coming.